workshop 4. This week we're talking about mobile learning. We're going to talk about modularized learning and electronic learning, mobile devices and stuff. And then I'll go into podcasts and videos and a post-it note method of teaching. Learn anywhere, anytime, and in our school anyway as well, kind of comes about from e-learning. Now, originally e-learning started off where you basically took your current content and packaged it all up into some kind of electronic format. You guys are all doing this in a sense with this ICT lectures where you can access them in your own time, but it's still just a lecture and a discussion board. The discussion board does make it a little bit more social. With mLearning, which is actually mobile learning, you're actually utilizing mobile technology in the classroom. So you're actually moving away from the, sure, here's all the stuff, to, okay, now we can actually use the technology to enhance our classrooms. To give you an example, we have a maths lesson. There's really only 3 things you do in a maths lesson, on the most part. Number 1, you either sit in the class and watch the teacher as they write down all their notes and you copy them down. Number 2, you do the exercises, exercise 4.1, and work the way through it. Or number 3, you do a test or an assignment. And that's about it. Now, that means you've got 30 individual learners sitting there with mass-produced class. So if the teacher gets up on the board, writes up the stuff they want to do, students copy it down, they work on their work. Now, it's not great. The teacher, if a student puts up their hand, which is good, and stops the teacher from teaching by asking a question, it actually pauses the lesson for every other student in the class. Now, they may actually get benefit from the question, but they're actually all pausing and learning. Now, if you actually instead change this to a video lesson, so if the teacher gets on and does the lecture all on their own, so I'm working on maths equations. We might be covering something like linear algebra equals y, and you could go through and explain exactly what's going on, and you can record this all on video. The students can watch this in their own time. If they're not understanding it, they can actually pause it, they can play it back. This means you actually have 30 individual learners who are learning at their own pace. The 4 groups, you have the high flyers, and the ones that actually get it will watch it straight through the first time. The second group, which is normally, will actually sit there, watch it, pause, write down notes. It'll be all colourful in their books, but they actually can pause it and take down notes and get very specific, and they get lots and lots of notes. They fill their book really quickly. And the third group are the ones who struggle a little bit and who watch the video, pause it, rewind, rewatch it, and so on. And the last group are the ones that really, really struggle. So they're the ones that doesn't matter. You know, they may have to watch it 5, 6, 7 times to understand it. Now, they may still need the teacher to help them out. But if all the students are in the class and they can watch the video in the classroom, the teacher is now free to move around the room. So if a student has a question, put up their hand. The teacher can walk up to that student. Everyone else continues on with their learning. Equally, you can bring all the students who are really struggling into one area, and the teacher can mentor them and teach them one-to-one. So this is kind of a e-learning and more packaged learning. So rather than creating the video or the podcast yourself, there are people that have already done this for us. So we've got here iTunes. There are currently 16,700 educational apps for the iPad or iPhone at the moment, which you could actually use in a classroom. Now, admittedly, they're all different, but there's nothing to stop you from checking out and using them in the class. Always go for the free ones if you can. So in the iTunes store, I'm going to look up German to see if there are any German apps, podcasts, videos, songs, whatever. And you can see straight away I'm getting some iPhone apps come up. So here's some apps on German: free German essential lessons, learn German vocabulary, and some albums, some songs. Now these are actual podcasts. I've never seen a podcast that you had to pay money for. If you're choosing a subject like science or English or social or music, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of sound bites that you can listen to. Now I also have here a podcast search engine. So if you don't have a Mac or you're not using iTunes, you can always use something like this is Double Twist. Here we go. So grow your own German. So there's all different German podcasts, and you can see there's heaps and heaps of pages of them. Khan Academy. Now the guy that designed the Khan Academy, his last name's Khan. I can't remember his first name. But he it apparently originally what happened was he was trying to teach his cousin who lived on the other side of America her maths, year 10 maths. He was pretty good with maths, and he thought, well, the best way I can do it is same as what I'm doing here. I can write it on a touchpad, record it onto YouTube, and then she can watch it. And he found that after a couple of weeks, he had like 1,000 people watching the video, and he thought this isn't possible. There's no way she'd watched it 1,000 times, but it was just so good that there were so many students actually jumping on and listening to it. It's very, very simple language. It feels like he's actually talking straight to you, and it's really easy to understand. Now, he currently has more than 3,000 videos in lots of different categories. So we talked about e-learning and mobile learning. Another example of mobile learning is where you're actually utilizing mobile technology in the classroom. So rather than actually using it as so I've got here an iPad, how would I use this in the classroom? Well, I always say to my students who have iPads in a science class, same as iPhones or any phone, I say bring your phone to class. Now, this may cause issues because some schools don't want mobiles in the classroom. But I say bring your phone to class. Imagine if you're doing a science practical and you take a photo of the practical before you start, you do the practical, take a photo at the end. So if it's chemistry prac, you can actually see the difference. If you're in a music class, you can actually record the sound. And when you go home, you can actually play it again. If you're in a language class, again, you can record the conversation and practice it at home. Language class, I hate to break the news, but generally most students really don't like language. They're forced to go through it, and so as soon as they leave that classroom, that's it, I'm out of here. I don't need to worry about it until next lesson. If you download a podcast, so download a language lesson, say your homework is to listen to it, well, now the class is left, the language has left the classroom, and the student has to listen to it. So it's actually, they realize that it's bigger than just the classroom thing. And that's, now we're getting towards actual blended learning. So rather than using the phone as a device, you're using the phone as a tool to continue their education outside the classroom. Now, I've got here just-in-time training. Basically, there's quite a large group of students, or actually they believe that currently about 70% of learning takes place outside of the classroom, and it's non-formal. It's students who want to learn something for the purpose of participating in a social forum, or for their game, or for whatever. So most learning is happening by the students anyway. The only time they don't like learning is when they're at school, because it's boring and not engaging, and it doesn't relate, or they can't see how it relates. eLearning 2.0 is where we start getting into social learning, blogs, wikis, podcasts, and Google Docs. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that one up is this week, one thing I've added to it as well is I've created a Google Doc. Now, a Google Doc is basically exactly the same as a normal document, except it's online. So if you've used it before, preaching to the converted. If you've never used it before, this is our Google Doc. And up here, this is the website. If you go to this website, you can actually edit my document. Or you can use this one here, you'll get to the same place. So you can actually... Now, the question I've got here is, what educational apps have you seen, used, or stumbled across? What I've done here is I've put in an app. In this case, it's SoundNote. I've got the link to SoundNote. I've got explaining what it is and then how I would use this in the classroom, or how I would use this. Well, you can start a Google document, and a group of students can actually all be participating in the same document. Rather than having one do it and then they collaborate afterwards, they can all be typing at the same time. And this is where you start getting to really some interesting stuff. Imagine in an English class where you have one group of students going to write the introduction, one group of students are writing the main body of the story, another group are writing the conclusion. But you set some parameters to start with, and then these students start writing the introduction at the same time as the body, and the conclusion are being written as well. So the people who are writing introduction need to keep an eye on what the other people are doing, because say it's a Superman story, or a story about Superman, and Superman flies in with a great big green truck and throws at the bad guy. Well, hang on, where does the green truck come in? That has to be introduced in the introduction. And equally, it has to be brought up in the main body. Now, if they introduce something in the introduction, the body and the conclusion have to actually continue on with that story rather than just let it go. So it actually becomes a real dynamic story. You know, almost like those old stories where you wrote one line, fold it over, the next person writes the next line, fold it over, and all you had was just like a little bit to continue on with. So you're actually producing a dynamic story that's not written from beginning to end. It just flows, and it's created out of lots of different places. Okay, so post-it notes. I have here, going back to way old school technology, right? So post-it note prac. Just to bring it up today, if you have students in your class who all have a mobile device and you start writing notes on the board, the smartest kid, or the kid that types the fastest, copies down your notes that you've written, emails it to the whole class. Now you wrote the notes on the board, one student in your class also wrote the notes on the board, the rest of them sat there and did nothing. So you've done about 90% of the work yourself, one kid's done 90% of the work, the rest of the kids have done 10% of the work. Very poor method. So you have to find a way of actually engaging the students and getting them to do the work. The example I'm going to give you is a post-it note teaching method that I really love to use. And I have all these students in my class with iPads and phones and whatever else. Some have laptops. So, for example, we're going to start a new topic tomorrow, and it's on electricity. And what I actually do is I say to them, okay, you are going to study electricity. You've got 5 minutes using whatever technology or textbooks you want to come up with as much information as you can about electricity. And what the students do is I give them a whole heap of these post-it notes, and they write one note on each page. Then once we've finished, and they've got them all sitting there in front of them, I say to them, okay, well, what kind of notes did you come up with? Now, teachers are fantastic at working out what hoops we want the students to jump through. So then you get the students to go bring up their post-it notes and paste them on the board. So the students will actually start putting them up on the board underneath the categories, and you have an other category. But you say, if you're bringing up a note and someone's written the exact same thing or something similar, stick it on top of theirs. So you actually start getting these bunches of notes. Next thing you do, once the students have all sat down, so they've spent about 5 or 10 minutes researching everything for you. And they've done all the research. They've done the looking, so they've done research, they've done collaboration, they've done correlation, where they're actually comparing their ideas to other people's, and producing a communal learning. The next thing you actually need to do is you pull up your PowerPoint that you've made beforehand, or that you've downloaded off the internet using, a Google. And you bring up the first page and you say, okay, well, the first page says electricity is a flow of electrons. And you look at your post-it note and you go, yes, guess what? This is what you guys said. Put a box, put a number 1 next to it, stick the post-it notes in that box and say, yes, well done, guys. That's exactly, you guys have all said that as well. Now, just to make sure, let's just copy down those notes. So the students are actually seeing value in what they're doing, and they feel like they're contributing to the learning process. So the post-it note activity is really, really good, uses old technology, and gets the students walking around. So it's actually a really good technique. Going to new technology now. Now I've got here 2 programs. One is Wall Wisher and one's Popplet. And Wall Wisher is exactly the same as the post-it note idea I've just said, except instead you're actually doing it on a virtual wall. So if I go in here and just double click, and I can write my message and post to this wall. Another one you could use instead of that one is Popplet. Popplet's quite a good one. You've got here basically same idea, and you can see here, if I click on here and go examples of good pedagogy skills, just drag the link out, click in here, listening to students. Popplet's a really good virtual wall again that students can use to share their ideas. This week on the discussion board, I'd like to just think of what are some issues with mobile phones in schools. Can they put mobile phones in schools? Is it legal? Is it illegal? Is it frowned upon by the school? Second is, given the opportunity, how would you use a mobile phone in your classroom? And again, keep it specific to your learning area. I'll divide this up into different threads. And thirdly, what apps have you seen, used, or stumbled upon that you would suggest to others?